So this is a comprehensive architecture diagram of a 3-tier application in AWS that can serve as a good example if you are trying to demonstrate requirement to a client or if you're trying to learn. Welcome to TNGS Learning Solutions. I am your host, Will. I would like to go over how to design an architecture diagram for a 3-tier application in AWS. In this illustration, I'm going to use Lucidchart. You can equally use tools like Visio, and there are other tools out there that can be used in designing architecture diagrams, but I'm going to use Lucidchart in this example. I think it will benefit you to explore the tool and get to be familiar with it, just in case you need to practice how to design architectural diagrams or you encounter it on the job. I'm already logged into my Lucid's account. I have created a blank document. Before I proceed, on the left side of my screen, I'm going to click on more shapes here, and I want to bring in AWS shapes. On the left side panel here, where you see all the shapes, I'm going to be utilizing these shapes here to put together the architecture diagram for the 3-tier application. On the flowcharts, I'm going to select the process shape here just to give it a white background. It makes it very easy for me to see what I'm putting together. And just to prevent this shape from moving randomly, I would like to lock it down. So what I would do is just right click on it and go to lock, unlock, and click on lock. Just keeps it in place. The next thing I would love to do is pull in. So since I'm designing an architecture diagram in AWS, I want to pull in a representation of what that is. And on the left side of my screen here, on the group icon, there's an AWS account icon here. So I'll pull that into my space here. So I right click on it and go to arrange and bring it to the front. If you realize when I pull it in, it almost puts it behind the initial shape that I put here, but I want it to be in front of it. So I right clicked on it and go to arrange, clicked on bring to front. I'm going to drag this shape, this account shape, and expand it like this, okay? In fact, I would expand it almost throughout the previous shape that I put. If I need more space later on, I can always unlock this shape behind it and extend it as well. But for now, I think this should be sufficient. Depending on your unique requirements, you would put together a design that will represent what your requirement is. An architecture design or an architecture diagram is sometimes required from a solutions architect based on a requirement that might come to you. As a solutions architect, you may or may not be responsible for putting together an architecture diagram, similarly to what I'm about to put together, to represent solution for a problem or a requirement, or simply put, representation of what your recommendations might be for a specific requirement. Or in other scenarios, it might be you need to put together an architecture diagram to represent current state of an environment. In either case, for this exercise only, let's consider we are putting together an architecture diagram for a 3-tier application in AWS, which is expected to sit in the same AWS account and in the same VPC. If you're not familiar with what an AWS account is or what a VPC is, I'm going to post subsequent videos that would describe those components of the cloud, AWS cloud, respectively, at some point in time. Okay, let's continue. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this account. So when you create an AWS account, it's going to have a unique identifier. That unique identifier is going to be an AWS account number, but the name, you can decide on what that would be. In my scenario, I would consider that the account I'm creating this architecture diagram for is called TNGS LLC. I'm not going to put an account number because I don't want to share that information publicly. Next thing I want to do is build an infrastructure for my 3-tier application. The infrastructure, the network infrastructure that is, includes my virtual private cloud right here. And once I pull it in, it's equally going to put everything in the back. And if I pull it completely into my space here, it disappears. So that's why before I bring it in, I right click on it and arrange it to be at the very front. So it's not transparent. When I pull this in, because I'm going to have a single VPC, I'm just going to line this up right here and expand it across as well. Right? Make everything looks nice and neat. So if I have to present it to anyone, it makes it very easy for them to understand what I am trying to represent in my diagram. A diagram is a visual representation of intent, basically a requirement that you're trying to pass, or basically information. Now that I've brought my VPC in, of course, a virtual private cloud is a network infrastructure for our AWS resources. Not all resources sit in the VPC, but for the resources that we are going to create an architecture diagram for, they need to be in the VPC. So that's why we do need a virtual private cloud representation in our architecture diagram. So next thing I want to do is obviously give it a name. I'm going to give it a name, TNGS LLC VPC. So the next thing I want to do is within a VPC, we have sub components called subnets. I'm not going to go into the details of what a virtual private cloud is or what network is in AWS, but that will be provided in a separate video. Next thing I want to do is I want to pull in my subnets. And in this VPC, I'm going to consider that I would have 2 private subnets and 2 public subnets. So how do I represent that in my diagram? I'm going to pull private subnets and bring this to the front. I'm going to pull 2 of these and put them side by side. And I want to consider that this is a design I am doing for production. All right, this is a production design. I'm going to duplicate this because I want 2 private subnet and 2 public subnet. And if you have a Windows on a Windows computer, you can simply hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and click on this and drag it, and it will duplicate it for you rather than pulling it in twice. So this kind of duplicates it for me, but it is almost like bringing a new one. So again, I'm going to right click on here and arrange to bring to front so it doesn't disappear on me. 2 private subnet, 2 public subnets. So it might be difficult for you guys to search through these icons and look for what you need, but you can also search right here if you're looking for an icon that you're not sure exactly where it is. Maybe I can just search for subnet, enter, and you can see it right here. So I'm going to bring this to the front, and just to make everything looks nice and neat, make sure that they both have the same size. I'm going to drag this as well and line them up next to each other. Right click, arrange, bring to the front. I'm not going to put every nitty gritty or every single piece of resources that needs to sit in this sitting account once I have deployed resources. But for this exercise only, I'm going to give a very high level demonstration of what a basic architecture diagram for a 3-tier application would look like. Now, next thing I want to do is define my application or my tiering, right? Now, 3-tier means you have 3 different layers of resources that supports your application. So let's consider the application is a WordPress application. A WordPress website could be running on a virtual machine. That virtual machine could be an EC2 instance in AWS. EC2 is a service in AWS that allows for you to host and run applications. The applications you run or host on an instance could be publicly facing, like WordPress, accessible, available to the entire world, or could be an application that is accessible internally within your organization or only to you. In this scenario, we want to consider using all best practices and make an assumption that we are deploying a WordPress application that is accessible externally to the internet, but still hosted using best practices. So in this scenario, I'm going to make a bit of an adjustment and extend my private subnets. I'm going to host my database using the relational database service in AWS, which is a service that can be used to host RDBMS, right? That is Relational Database Management Systems. RDS is an AWS managed service that allows an organization to host and manage a database, a relational database management system. So in this scenario, first tier will be represented by RDS. RDS, and let's use this icon here. You can reduce the size of the icon and the size of the font as well, so you can fit in the architecture diagram. And because this is production, I'm going to use production best practices as well. So I'm just going to put a red replica of this database in a different availability zone across. So my two subnets are going to be in two different availability zones. So if I'm to name my subnets as well, maybe I'd give it some name like TNGS LLC US East 1A. And I can copy this same name and give it here as well, except for 1A, this is going to be in a different availability zone, 1B, right? And one more thing I want to add here, just to differentiate for the sake of naming, I'm going to put a prefix here and say this is private. Let's consider this is our private subnet. I'm equally going to put that prefix here as well, so we can differentiate between our private and public subnet. I'm going to copy this as well, and let's name our public subnets, and let's give this public and public 1A, and let's name the other subnet public 1B. I'm going to reduce the fonts of this resources to maybe 6, just to make it fit, okay? So it doesn't overshadow my architecture, right? And I'm going to reduce the font size here as well, 6. All right. So this is my first tier, my database tier, and just to make things organized, just to let you guys know exactly what I'm referring to as this is my first tier, I'm just going to put a basic representation of sections, and see my screen seems to have been frozen. I'm going to put this as, I will label this as tier 1, and this is database. So this is my database representation of my first tier. And my second tier, I'm gonna put some coloring on that. And my second tier, I want it to be my application tier. Application tier, okay? And for the application tier, I would decide to host my WordPress application on an EC2 instance. So what I would do here is go down and look for an EC2 instance icon. What I would love to do next is pull in a representation of what my web application tier would look like. So I will search for EC2 and drag those here to represent my web tier. Reduce the font to 6, label this as WordPress app. I want to duplicate this, and considering this is production, I want to duplicate the servers and put them in something called auto scaling group. So I'm going to search for auto scaling group, and I love to use this icon and just put it in the middle here. An auto scaling group is basically an auto scaling feature within the EC2 instance or within the EC2 service that allow for the automatic scaling of resources. Specifically in this scenario, automatic scaling of EC2 instances in case that is needed. I'm not going to go into depth on what that is, but again, I'll have a separate video demonstrating the definition and effect of what an auto-scaling is and what it can do. Equally, what are the benefits of it? There's one more tier that I want to introduce. Let me adjust this. Again, you can see that I do modify my diagram as I go based on the artifacts that I put in there. The next thing I want to do is put in my last tier, which is the application or the load balancer tier. I'm going to extend this here. So I have 3 tiers. I have my database tier, I have my application tier, and my load balancer tier. I'm just going to represent this tiering using different colors to make things look nice and exciting. Next thing I want to do is put in my application load balancer, which is going to sit behind my web application servers. Instead of having 2 public subnets here, I want to represent them in a different way. So I'm going to copy this name here just because I want my design to look unique in a different way. So I'm going to remove this one and extend this one across and just put both labels here just to let folks know that there are actually 2 subnets here, because technically to implement an application load balancer in AWS, you need a minimum of 2 subnets. Without having 2 subnets, it will be impossible for you to actually create an application load balancer. So let's look for an elastic load balancer icon and represent that in our diagram accordingly. Or I can just search for load balancer, and there is one icon here that I like to use. I can pull that in and represent it just like this. Let me reduce the font size to 6 and pull this in. And I'm going to change the font size of my PPC, make sure that there is consistency. As part of next steps, I would like to add some additional artifacts into this architecture. For example, each layer would have a security group associated to it. I will search for security group. I want to place a security group on my database. I'm going to reduce the font size here as well to 6 and put a single security group here on the database and just make this look as good as possible. Move this up a little bit. Now I'm just trying to arrange the architecture to look a little more presentable. So I'm going to zoom in here, and what I want to do is bring this down, bring this up a bit. I want to call it database, maybe or lowercase database security group, SG, database security group. And likewise, I want to create a security group for my application servers. And I'm going to bring this to the front. I'm going to pull this in a little bit more, pull this in more, make this smaller, just like this, and pull the server down a little bit, make everything look aligned, and give the name of this security group as WordPress app security group. In fact, let's make it WordPress security group. SG stands for security group. Make things look a little bit more aligned. Just create some alignment here and just make sure that everything looks presentable. Next thing I want to do is just put a security group behind my application load balancer. I need a security group behind my application load balancer because that is how I'm going to restrict traffic to and from that load balancer. So I'm just going to put some very basic components on here, not to make this more complicated than it is already. As you can see here, I think we're almost done. A couple more things I want to add. There's a service in AWS called Route 53, which is a DNS service. Route 53, I want to use Route 53 as my DNS. The reason why I'm pulling Route 53 in this scenario, let me fix this architecture to look a little bit more presentable and accommodate this minor change that I want to add on here. I'm going to pull the Route 53 at the account level because Route 53 is a global service. I'm going to change the font size to 6 And one more thing I'm going to introduce here is Internet Gateway. An Internet Gateway is the means through which we are going to get internet into our VPC. Why do we need internet in our VPC? Because we are deploying an application that need accessibility to the internet. One more thing I need to add here is users. Let's consider you are a user on your web browser. You hit www.tngs.com. What happens is traffic flows from your local browser on your computer to AWS. I happen to configure my DNS for TNGS in Route 53 in AWS and a DNS record pointing to tngsllc.com through a port number of 44380, HTTPS or HTTP. Those are different network protocol that allow web traffic to travel from one location to another. I think I made a mistake here. This is going to be application load balancer, not network load balancer. These traffic needs to get from here to here. So what happens is it needs to go through internet gateway. This internet gateway will be the entry point of internet traffic in my VPC. And this traffic travels to the internet gateway and to my load balancer. Once it gets to my load balancer, then my load balancer will be configured to send that traffic to the web servers behind it and only allowed to travel on 443. For accessibility to my database, then I can allow traffic between my security group of my web servers to communicate to my database. Same way as traffic flows into my environment will be the same pattern which it flows back out. If a user requests a content through a custom URL or domain, if it's available on the web servers, then that traffic will travel the same way back out to the user on the same web browser through which they requested an information. Only if that content is not available on the web servers, then that request will not be redirected to the database. It will display the content back out to the server, which sends it back to the user. If it doesn't have, then it sends back an error message saying that this content is not available. So this is a comprehensive architecture diagram of a 3-tier application in AWS that can serve as a good example if you are trying to demonstrate requirement to a client or if you're trying to learn. I'm going to put an image of this diagram in the description. I'm also going to put a link for Lucidchart on how to sign up and get a free account as well in the description. Please subscribe, share, and like for more content. Thank you.